Hi there, my name's Alex and I run the Autism Acceptance page on Facebook. Obviously, if you're seeing this on Facebook, you will know that. If you're seeing it on YouTube, then I will drop a link in the comments section to my Facebook page where you can go along and check it out. I cover a wide range of topics from a neurodiversity standpoint, but a non-woke one. I highlight many autistic content creators' work as well as put my own input about my own experience. So if that's something you would be interested in, then yeah, go along and check out my Autism Acceptance page. Now, if you do follow my Autism Acceptance page, you will know that I am very motivated. In fact, a lot of what motivated me, not the whole thing, but a lot of what motivated me to set up my Autism Acceptance page is the work of the late great autistic author and advocate Donna Williams. Sadly, she lost her fight to cancer in 2017, but she shaped how we see autism today. She showed that autism was a multifaceted condition, and that there's no one thing called autism, there's no one size fits all. And she also showed when you see this classic behaviours or typical behaviours, she showed the whys behind the whats. All we've seen in the past when we look at autism is the whats. ABA is how to tackle behaviour. This behaviour occurs, this is how you deal with it. Then you get the massive struggles and resistance. That's because, in my opinion, nobody likes to be controlled. But if you don't understand what the behaviour is, where the behaviour is coming from, what it stems from, then just trying to stamp it out can be met with a long, hard war. Many autistic people have coping strategies that I think we don't give them credit for, especially if they're quote unquote low functioning. But anyway, this is how Donna Williams, this is an extract from Donna Williams' book, Nobody Nowhere, her first autobiography book. And this is towards the end of her book. And this is about when she's found out she's autistic and she wants to now meet, she's not met or not really spent time with other people who are autistic, or knowingly spent time with other people who are autistic. So this is when she does. Now, I'd like just to clarify something so you understand the bit at the end. So hold this in mind. Carol was a little girl Donna met in the park when they were both little girls. And she seemed to be kind of like a first friend or first interaction as friends with a child, playing together. And then she never saw Carol again, but Carol made a big impression on her, and she used Carol as like an alter ego for her exposure anxiety. So when she couldn't handle herself or the existence of herself inside herself, she used Carol as a personality, as someone she could morph into. The memory of Carol, this little girl she met in the park. So just hold on to that, and you'll understand the ending of this little passage. that I'm going to read. Okay, so this is basically how it began when she met other autistics, how her advocacy work began. I wanted to meet other autistic people I'd been told about, and was surprised to find that they were few and far between, scattered across the country, across the world. I was in an even smaller category because I had become high functioning. Nevertheless, I wanted to meet others who I could only know where I belonged in relation to them when I had met those on the other side of society. I met the world of so-called normal people, the people I'd aspired to become. Now it was time to meet people still trapped in the place I once came from, and in some ways still was. Kath was a solid personality with whom I felt relatively secure. Her voice was rather flat and even, and the pace with which she spoke was easy to follow. She had long, straight grey hair and darting eyes, and though I felt welcomed by her, I didn't feel smothered by her involvement. She had a son my age, and her son was autistic. When I met him, he was running his hands through coloured beads. I didn't want him to say hello or ask me how I was. These were words reserved for those who wanted to move in the world, and her son Perry certainly didn't. I sat on the floor nearby and took out a handful of coloured buttons and glass fruit. I sorted them into groups, put my hand out to where Perry was playing with his beads, and without a glance and without a word, I dropped them. Perry caught them and did the same back. I remembered my first version of relating mirrors, but this time there would be no one to say that my version of relating wasn't good enough. This went on for a while, and we began to modify the game. I had a bell which I jingled to myself and dropped it for him to catch, like before. Like before, Perry repeated, but with the added feature of making a noise to go with it. I mirrored him, and the game became mobile, with us following one another about the place, in turn ringing the bell and giving it over as the game became more and more direct. I sat back on the floor, lining up the buttons in categories. Perry approached, picked up a button here and there, and added them to my rows where they belonged. Without looking at him, I knew what he was saying. These games that had always belonged to me, now I saw that these games belonged to autistic people. I hadn't noticed that Kath had entered the room. She was standing there silently as Perry came over to where I was, laid himself out, face down on the floor in front of me, arms pulled up tightly against his sides as he shook with anxiety. "Look at me," I said, reading the same action I'd seen so many times in myself. "Look, I'm daring to be touched." I had looked straight at Perry lying there, as I had said it, tears rolling down my eyes as I read his behaviour as one might read a book. I had the tremors from head to toe and wished the Welshman was there to understand himself as I came to understand myself. I turned to see Kath crying. I never knew he had any language, she said. Now I see he does. I just don't know how to speak it. She said she had never seen him look so normal. I had never felt I'd understood another individual so well. We think it is us who have to teach autistic people, Kath said. Now I see it is us who have so much to learn from them. I'm not crying, I've got an itchy eye. Kath was also a teacher at a school for autistic children. There was a camp on, and she asked me if I'd come along. I was scared to break the routine of my usual work. It was one thing to drift without direction when one was in total control. It was another thing altogether to break with an established routine, to take up an invitation I'd had no part in making, even if it was for just one day. The offer was left open, and I was free to come for as long as I wanted, and as long as I was able to cope, and then go again. I arrived by train, then bus, and then taxi to a setting in the middle of the countryside of Kent. The children were inside, and I was overwhelmed by the number of people. Kath said she'd tell them I was coming, but that didn't stop the usual hello there, and as I gravitated to Kath and left her to talk for me. Not all the children at the school were autistic, particularly at this gathering, but at the dinner table, one girl in particular stood out as very familiar. Anne was 8, but the size of a 6-year-old, with long blonde hair and pale white skin like mine. Most distinctive was her gaze, one eye staring blankly ahead, the other turned sharply inwards. She was seated at the table with her mouth firmly set around the edge of it, as she explored its surface with her tongue. I looked at her and felt somewhat exposed. Kath wasn't with her, and the other professionals were impatiently shouting at her in what I felt from her stare must have been an unintelligible mass of noise threatening to get in. So these were the professionals, I thought, as I reflected on my own mother's approach. Looking at Anne, I thought to myself, I know where you are. Getting Anne to do anything sent her into hysterics, as one might expect from a child blind and deaf to the world around her, and most likely also to herself. Yet something was missing. She had no form of comforting herself. I felt compelled to give her a consistent pattern, something to hold on to, and to use to calm herself down long enough to open her eyes and take a look at the world. The threat of exposing this in front of other people seemed impossible. Anne followed me about, and I headed outside for the space of unfenced in greenness. Anne was chasing me as I avoided her, busy dancing upon her shadow. She began intermittently to focus on my shadow, and we chased each other back and forth in turn, both of us, with our eyes upon each other's shadow and feet. I looked up to see a few teachers looking out at us through the glass in the kitchen window. Who's under glass now? I thought. Donna always said she felt like she lived in a world under glass. It was night time and the children were being put to bed. Naturally, this wasn't an easy task when it comes to children who aren't used to being still and aren't not quite aware of what sleep is meant to be for. One autistic boy jumped up and down in the dark on top of his bunk. Anne screamed in terrified hysterics as one of the professionals sat on her bed beside her, tucking a doll in next to her, which seemed to horrify her all the more. Oh, those symbols of normality. Dolls, I thought. Oh, those terrifying reminders that one is meant to be comforted by people, and if one can't, one must at least feel comforted by their effigies. The woman sitting on Anne's bed was screaming at her over and over again to shut up and propping the doll back up in place with every shove Anne made to push it away. It was more than I could take. Physically, I moved the woman out of the way, moved the doll, and gave her my brush. Anne ran her fingers repeatedly through the bristles, listening to the soft, barely audible sound in her ear and the sensation in her hand. I began to hum a repetitive tune I used to do for myself over and over again as I tapped her arm in time to the hypnotic tune. Give her something consistent to hold on to, I thought. There'll be all the time in the world for the experts to undo it. Anne's crossed eyes were frozen in a dead stare, and she became silent between sobs. I took her hand and made her tap her own arm as I had. The tune and the rhythm and the tapping held totally constant. I heard a soft but audible rhythm coming from outside of me. Anne was making the tune in herself, in her throat, and I slowly dropped the notes of my own humming, and as I expected, she filled them in as though they were and always had been her own. Slowly I dropped out more and more of them until she was doing not only the rhythm in her throat but carrying the tune as she tapped herself in time. Then, for a frozen 15 seconds, in the torchlit dark room, she completely uncrossed her eyes, and for the first time since I'd met her, and looked directly into my face as she tapped and now hummed. I went to leave several times, only to have to repeat the process. What was important, however, was that as I left, she continued to tap and hum the tune between short bursts of fear. As the sun had come up on a new day and a trip to the park was scheduled, Anne's screams came from a small room at the back of the hall. I walked to the door, only to see the same tactics of trying to calm her down by screaming, "Shut up!" into her face. "I will stay with her," I said coldly from the doorway. "You're welcome to her," came the reply, which seemed to sound as though she was some sort of unwanted baggage which the woman was glad to be rid of. I took out a crystal I had with me and turned it in front of my face. I took out a crystal I had with me and turned it in front of Anne's face. Anne grabbed for it, and I let her take it. She looked at it in her hand, and I felt I could see glimpses of my grandparents in myself as I related to her through this object. I sang the old tune over and over, and Anne's hand went automatically up to her arm, and she tapped herself to the rhythm and eventually joined in. We went out peacefully to the bus. Someone grabbed suddenly for Anne to pile her onto the bus. In the confusion of children everywhere and verbal garble, Anne went into hysterics. Then suddenly her hand went up to her arm and she tapped herself, humming the tune. The bus started up and she allowed herself to be strapped in. As she calmed down, the tapping and humming stopped. Anne was learning she could control her own anxiety and the level of overwhelming input. When we got to the park, the same thing happened. She calmed herself down and climbed out of the bus. I walked ahead across the gate. On tiptoe, Anne half ran, half stumbled as she made her way to where I was. She took my hand, and in unison we broke into a skip, swinging our hands as we went away from the others, across the park to the swings. We both got on the swings as we swung higher and higher. I remembered another park a long time ago and wondered if one day there would be a little autistic girl who would remember a person called Donna in the world whose hand she had taken to skip across the park. Okay, my lovely people, that's an introduction of how the late great autistic author and advocate Donna Williams first met autistic people and began her advocacy work. Love and peace to you all, and remember you're stronger than your struggles. Bye for now.